Thanks, Level. Great to be here again this year and to be standing in front of so many people. I always hope that that's testament to our previous conferences, and hope that this one is no different, and that you can come out with some good insights and some good learnings. It's my job today to really set the scene for the conference. So to just describe the corporate social investment setting in South Africa, in order for you to have that background going into all of the rest of the sessions. So the two things that I'll be covering are the size and scope of the sector in South Africa and some of the trends, and then I'll also be talking a little bit about strategic CSI, which links to the new award that Nick mentioned we're launching. So all the information, I'm going to put up a lot of charts, so excuse me for that if you get a bit bored of the numbers, but all of the information that I'm talking about is published in the 16th edition of the CSI handbook. And for those of you who don't have that, there are copies available at our stand outside. But just to say that information, each year we interview over 100 corporates and over 200 non-profits in order to get those trends and that information. So I'd like to thank all the corporates and non-profits in this room who participated in that research. I know it's very detailed questions and it's quite time-consuming. So thank you, because without that we wouldn't have the information that we do. And we've just entered the field for this year's research, so I encourage all of you non-profits and corporates to get involved. The non-profit survey is online and the corporate survey is done face-to-face. So, to start then, just to set the scene in terms of size, we estimated that in 2013, corporate social investment expenditure was 7.8 billion rand. And we use a very wide definition when estimating this. So we include all monetary donations by corporate social investment departments. We also include, where companies quantify it, donations of goods and services. We include the local economic development spend of mining companies. So it's a very broad definition that basically is any contributions by companies to community development in South Africa. And I'll speak a little bit about a narrower definition later. What this graph shows you is that despite the fairly rough economic times we've experienced in the last few years, we've seen very consistent, strong growth in CSI spend over the years. And in the years up to 2007, we saw real growth of about 3% per annum. And from 2007 onwards, we've seen growth of about 10% real growth per annum. And as you'll know, the BEE scorecard became effective in 2007, and that we feel is one of the reasons for that uptick in the expenditure, which we continue to see growing. The other reason that we think some of this growth has come about, I mean, last year we saw growth of 13% nominal and 8% real, is firstly because companies are, because of the wider definition, so they're now including more in their CSI definitions or in their published information on CSI. But there's also better recording and measurement of non-financial contributions. So where companies donate goods and services, we've seen them increasingly measure that, and where there's volunteering time, companies are also starting to quantify that. So we think there is real growth, but that's enhanced, if you will, by the better measurement and recording of the numbers. As I mentioned, we do have various definitions of CSI. So the 7.8 billion is the broad definition that includes all contributions to community development. And then we ask companies about how much is given through a dedicated CSI budget or department. And here we see that that amounts to about 6.4 billion. The difference between the two numbers, the total CSI and the dedicated CSI, is actually becoming smaller each year, as we see the definition of CSI broaden in many companies. We also then ask how much money is channeled through, or how many donations are channeled through non-profits. And you can see that it's 3.5 billion goes through non-profits last year. Okay, so we have been tracking, and we ask CSI, we ask corporates, we also ask non-profits each year whether their expenditure has increased or decreased. And last year we saw that over half of the corporate respondents reported that they'd actually increased their CSI expenditure. This graph, fairly complicated, but it's just to show that CSI expenditure is highly concentrated. So the large companies, so this graph basically shows the 100 largest companies, and together they constitute 70%, or 5.4 billion of the total spend. So you can see there that 13 companies are spending more than 100 million each year, and 15 companies are spending 50 to 100 million. So those top 100 companies account for 70% of the total spend. So that's a fairly concentrated figure we're looking at. And half of the expenditure of the top 100 is accounted for by just 13 companies. We find sector-wise that the companies with the most significant expenditures are firstly the mining companies, and that's the majority of those with the expenditure over 100 million. And then also the financial service sector companies and some of the retail companies fall into this category of large expenditure. So each year we also ask companies what is their rationale or reason for doing CSI. And this is a finding that has been fairly consistent over the years. The reason that is cited by most respondents is moral imperative to do it or doing the right thing. And you can see that was cited by over 80% of the respondents in our survey last year. This was followed by reputation, and I think that's one of the key benefits that a lot of corporates often cite for CSI, and I'll talk about some of the other benefits a little later in the presentation, and then followed by the codes. So where does this money go? We look at the distribution of the money in various ways. And what you can see here is the distribution by geography or by province. So the right-hand on your side, the right-hand side of the graph, or the red, is the percentage of CSI expenditure that goes to that province. And the left-hand side shows the percentage of companies that support that province. So you can see that Gauteng gets the most support with over 60% and receives over 20% of the total funds. And I think you'll see from this chart that the geographic allocation of CSI basically follows the economic footprint of the country, so that you've got Gauteng, Western Cape and KZN accounting for the majority of the spend. The national bar at the top basically refers to projects or programs that occur in more than one province, often where people might not know the exact allocation between the different provinces. Interestingly, our NPO distribution was quite a bit different, but I think this is largely due to sample bias of the NPOs, and we saw that 30% of the NPOs that we surveyed were actually in the Western Cape, and their work was done there. Last year we also included a question about urban and rural, and as we kind of expected, there was a greater percentage of CSI expenditure going to urban projects at almost 60%, but over 80% of corporates say they also support rural projects. So that was actually higher than expected. Then the next thing we look at when we look at the allocation of funding is the development sector. So which sectors are funded by corporate? Here we can see that education is supported by the majority of the corporates, with almost 90%, 89% of them funding some kind of education programs, and over 40% of total funding going to education. Now, this has been consistent over all the years that we have tracked CSI expenditure, but last year was the first year that education received more than 40%, and it's actually stayed the same this year. So it's always received more than a third, between 30 and 40%, but this year, last year and the previous year were the first times that it went over 40%. So education programs are receiving the majority of CSI expenditure. This is followed by social and community development, which is a fairly broad sector that covers many different types of projects and different types of beneficiaries, and that's then followed by health. We also asked corporates, and I'll go on to talk about the kind of reverse question for NPOs, but for how long they support their flagship or key projects. And we see that almost 90% of corporates say they support them for 3 or more years, their flagship projects, which I think is good news. One of the things that we often hear at this conference is that nonprofits are looking for longer term funding, for better relationships, and I think this also will speak to a number of topics that were covered in this conference, in terms of if there's longer term funding, you can do better monitoring and evaluation, build better relationships, and realize more benefits both for the corporate and for development. Okay, so in terms of where the money goes by type of organization, again, the largest recipient type is the non-profit organizations. So you can see that almost 90%, the grey bar at the top, almost 90% of corporates do fund NPOs in one way or another, and that NPOs get just over half of the budget at 54%. So half of corporate expenditure is going to NPOs, and then the next highest is to government institutions. And by this we mean directly to schools or clinics or hospitals or different types of government institutions. So while nonprofits receive half of CSI funding, NPO, this shows the NPO sources of funding, and they receive their largest amount of funding from corporates, but it sits at around 25%. So again, that's the top bar. So when we questioned all the NPOs on what are your sources of funding and what percentage of your funding comes from each of these sources, about a quarter is coming from South African corporates, and this is followed by South African government. As I mentioned, we also asked non-profits whether their income increased or decreased in 2013, and we saw quite a significant improvement in the last year. So the previous year, I think there was a lot around how during the bad economic times, how we heard many stories of NPOs struggling and laying off staff, closing, and you see in the 2012 bar there that more NPOs said that it decreased than increased, but in 2013, 46% of the NPOs claimed that their income had increased during that year. And I did speak about it last year as well, but Greater Good also does a survey each year, specifically on NPO income and job losses, and their findings echoed ours in terms of an improvement in the last year. So although they found that 50% of the NPOs in their survey said that their income had actually been cut, it was a big improvement from the 80% that they had recorded in the previous year. So it looks as if the situation for nonprofits, certainly those in our sample, has definitely improved, and there has been an increase in income. Another question that we ask is around how many, on average, or how many relationships with each type of funder do nonprofits have? And this table just shows for the 2 years the number of relationships by type. And as you would expect, there's most private individuals, but we see that in 2013, the NPOs in our sample had an average of 22 different corporate donors. And so one of the things that comes out of our survey is the administrative burden that this places on many of them, because often they're requiring different types of reports, different types of information at different times. So one of the things that we'd encourage is for NPOs and corporates to have those conversations up front about what information requirements are and when, and how they can align with what the NPO is already reporting, or how the NPO can report potentially on a quarterly basis in a manner that will actually benefit all of its different types of donors. Okay, so that's it in terms of the facts and figures. And yeah, if you do want more information, I know I've gone through that quite quickly. It is in the handbook, which is available at our stand. Now I want to move on to talk about what we call strategic CSI. I think there's been a growing academic literature on strategic CSI in the last couple of years. And I suppose it started in about 2002 with Michael Porter at Harvard Business School publishing a paper on what he called strategic philanthropy. And essentially what it looks at is how companies can create a social benefit at the same time as this is from his paper, at the same time as an economic benefit or a corporate benefit. So how they can conduct their CSI projects in a way that has both a developmental impact and a positive business impact. And that sweet spot is what he termed strategic philanthropy. And now the thinking and the research around this area has moved on since then, and I'm sure many of you have heard of the term shared value. And that's been, he published another paper, I think it was about in 2012, also in the Harvard Business Review, on shared value, which expanded this concept beyond CSI or philanthropy, actually to the business itself. So how can the operations and activities of the business itself have a positive impact on the communities and society in which they operate? And there's a lot of literature around that concept as well. So what we've done at Trialogue is, based on all of our experience over the 15 years, as well as some of the academic literature that's come out, we've developed a CSI positioning matrix, which you can see on the screen now. And it has the same axes as that previous graph in terms of corporate benefits and social benefits. And then we've defined specific criteria for each of the quadrants. So what you can see is in your top right sits the strategic CSI quadrant. And this is where companies realize a significant corporate benefit from their CSI, beyond just reputational benefit. So we saw that one of the big motivations for CSI was reputation, but the concept of strategic CSI is actually to say benefit beyond just reputation. So the two categories we have there are stakeholder benefit, and this is where, through a CSI project, there's meaningful engagement with a key stakeholder group that actually leads to better relationships with that group, whether it be clients, customers, suppliers, government, or employees. So that's the one type of corporate benefit in strategic CSI. And the other one is what we've termed competitive benefit. And here it's where the company as a whole can actually get some kind of competitive advantage through its CSI projects. So this could be through introducing new markets for a product or service, or in fact the developing and piloting new products that then become mainstream in the company. It could be through lowering costs, or it could be through securing specialized talent for the business. So a CSI program that feeds into producing talent for the business. So that's on the corporate side. On the social side, you'll see that in the strategic CSI quadrant, there's two elements there. There's beneficial outcomes or beneficial impact. And what we're looking for there is evidence of the changes in lives of beneficiaries. So you want to see that there's been a positive outcome in the lives of those beneficiaries, and that has been evidenced and measured in some way. So then you can see commercial grant making as the quadrant below that, where there is significant corporate benefit again, but perhaps unmeasured developmental benefit, or developmental benefit that reaches the output level, where companies are measuring the number of beneficiaries or the number of houses built, etc. Developmental CSI, on the flip side, has a greater social benefit than it does a corporate benefit. So that can be where there is significant development, positive development outcomes or impact, but where the corporate benefit may end at the reputation level, which you can see in that recognition of contribution section of the chart. And then at the bottom we've got charitable grant making, where the The corporate benefit is basically about recognition, which could be reputational benefits, it could be recognition on the BEE scorecard. And the developmental benefit is at the output level. So I just want to make a note that, because a lot of people look at this graph and think, okay, all our projects need to be strategic CSI. That's not the case. There's room for projects across all of these quadrants, and there's different reasons to be in all of the quadrants. The idea is that this can provide a framework to make conscious decisions about where you want your projects to go and how you want to allocate your funds. So, a corporate may choose to have a single strategic project that they really want to build as a long-term flagship program, and then to have a portion of their budget in charitable grant making that's more reactive, that they conduct less M&E on. That's a perfectly valid choice. So the idea is to provide a framework for companies to actually make a more informed decision. And I think I would encourage all of you in this room to try and plot your programs on this, and for the non-profits also to think about the projects that you work on with corporates, where would they fit? And to think about how can we, in our work, create a greater benefit for the corporate. Because the more benefit there is for them, the more sustainable the project becomes. So can we involve our corporate funders, stakeholders in some way? Can we think about new markets for them, moving to that competitive benefit? So this is the framework. It will be explored in further detail in one of the breakaway sessions later today, but it's also going to be the basis of our strategic CSI award. So what we're going to be looking for is good examples of projects that fall into that strategic CSI quadrant, which we will then profile in the handbook and at the conference. Okay, I just wanted to finish with some tips. In our research each year, we ask corporate practitioners to provide, and we ask the NPOs to provide tips to other corporate practitioners on how to improve their practice. And I'm not going to read these all out, but I'm sure you all have heard them and would agree with them. It's about planning, it's about focus, it's about a longer term commitment, it's about development needs. And most of all, at the bottom, and this one came out quite a lot, it's about being passionate about what you do. And I think that's why most of you are here in this room, and I'm hoping that through this conference you can confirm the belief in what you're doing every day and harness that passion that's so important to the work that you all do. So yeah, that's it from me. Enjoy the conference.